Welcome to Portals of Perception and to Jeff and Aviv, once again, skating to the frontier of emergence as the epoch culminates at its own liminal frontier. Jeff, welcome.
Thank you, Aviv. Let's skate.
Indeed. Well, so the premise we are gathering, and you have accompanied me with your ecology facilitation mastery and calibrating truth and alignment. The journey you've accompanied me over the last 4 or 5 years is that I've been journeying with the global network inside the premise of what we call the epoch journey, the epoch culmination. And once again, I'm coming out of a 4-day intense process, collective global process, where we have a network, including people down under in New Zealand and Australia, so they get up in the middle of the night. So we are very gifted to have people from different parts of the planet. And actually, it's very curious because we are right there in the Dunbar number. Okay, sometime 120, sometime 150 people show up, which is evolutionarily the number of people that often, well, Margaret Mead said never underestimate the power of a small group of people to change the course of civilization. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And she probably meant 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 people together, which is true. It's the small quantum of the Dunbar number. If you expand it, so right there, the 120, 150 is a size you can still get to know every person by name. And when you break out through a 6-hour journey on a day to do rooms in groups of 2s or 3s or 4, and every time differently, there is a rich combinatorial explosion that occurs between the experiences and the neural configurations and the creative inclinations of the people involved. So what I want to once again do is distill out of a probably 24 hours, because that's what it amounted to, few highlights and run it by you and let your system calibrate and respond. So how about that as a premise to launch into?
Perfect, I'm in.
Okay, so to begin, right, so I begin by bringing up this rainbow 7-fold premise, which has accompanied us right from the get-go. And once again today I will codify why those 7 colors, why those 7 potencies, and what do they represent developmentally in the sense of the process rather than stages of development. And I will get to that in a moment. Before I get there, I want to begin by establishing a few core premises and see what your system will offer to that. So premise 1 is the intuition, the instinct that's arising with many of us all over the planet. Certainly I know that to be the case in your work. We are in the middle of a step function evolutionary change. There are many expressions, many domains of life where we can see that. So that's a high level premise we are coming inside of, and we are proposing that in itself is a premise within a premise, because it really is the unfolding journey of an epoch, 3,500 years, the 3,500 years journey from the completion or the breakdown of the Bronze Age, where we come through an epoch that is now culminating. And within that epoch, there were many epochs that culminated through the rise and fall of civilizations. And yet that there is something profoundly different that's occurring now, because for the first time, there is truly a global civilization, a global shared communication and commerce platforms, And if one civilization falls apart in Europe, there isn't another alternative civilization in the East. Or if there is a civilization falling apart in the East, there isn't another civilization alternative in the West. There is really a global planetary civilization, which is indeed one of the premises as to why we are proposing that we are in a step function change and a shift from a planetary to universal culture and civilization, which is the core premise of our universalis inquiry. And so we build into this the recognition that the epoch is not a concept, is not a mental structure, rather it is a living process. It's arising inside us, it's arising in between us, it arises all around us, and it is something we can live into inside and in between us in our conversations and discoveries, which is the premise to come together in small pods or in a larger network to metabolize, to ease, to decode these ideas as they unfold. And it is that enables us to then ground in the greater consciousness and awareness and appreciation of the sevenfold potencies. What do they represent? How do they create a fractal of re-emergence on the small, medium, and long wave scales? That is to say, the sevenfold process is a planetary blueprint. So the life of a person can be looked through the sevenfold potencies. When you take up at any stage in your life a project, a business project, a developmental project, a relational endeavor with a community of people to evolve as a community, any one of those small or large scale, including cultures and civilizations, and ultimately the epoch, we can decode and map through a sevenfold potencies. And that is, to me, not just merely chronological, although there are the dimensions of that chronological steps, but within every phase, there is the full spectrum reappearing. So for example, we could easily look at the Roman Empire and look to identify the sevenfold processes within those. And in a minute, I will bring up on screen a way to name those seven. And inside this idea that the epoch is culminating, we recognize what we describe as the below the line metacrisis. The metacrisis is expressed in global warming. And we say that while the planet is heating up, the human inside its own system is heating up. So there is heating up within the human. The oceanic ecology is going through degradation. And we ask, is it also true that the human is losing the fidelity and the conductivity of its interior salty water? So the metacrisis is something that we decode inside the human and in the planetary scenery, the global scenery. There is a leadership crisis in the world, and yes, we see the need and the crisis of self-leadership. So all of those dimensions below the line, and as important, Jeff, as so many times we have discussed, and certainly also in your work, the sense that while there is this breakdown, there is this step function emergence of evolutionary capacities, new sense organs, new ways of impacting ourselves. You described on several occasions how sometime with one thought you can change a course of a day, a course of an event, a course of a life with one thought. The power of that, the conductive transmission from self to self and to others, all those are some of the natures of the capacities that are coming online in this epochal shift. And so we describe the below the line and above the line in the sense that the potential of human life in its natural capacity is there. a lot of what we accumulated in history indeed involves the conditioning of distrust, pain, trauma, and so much more. This is a body of work where we together sense into what is naturally available for humans to liberate, to heal, to redeem, and then with that, what is evolutionarily becoming possible as we journey in this time of epochal shift and evolutionary change. So these are some foundational premises. I said quite a bit here. What comes alive for you?
Great. Well, clearly we're speed skating today. A few insights do stand out for me to comment on. And one is to affirm, yes, of course, I'll say, of course, we're in a step function evolutionary change. And I would go so far as to say, and you've also said this, a new species is emerging at this time of epochal culmination and reemergence. And to me, that relates to the capacity to see the pattern, to see the fractal nature of being and experience and manifestation. And it was some years ago, maybe 10 years ago, I had an epiphany where I was asking into the distinctions, intuitively asking into the distinctions between Homo sapiens, sapiens, and then naturally I wanted to know whether there could be a Homo sapiens. And what immediately came was, once we have the capacity to see the pattern, to see the whole pattern, and to actually hold it by virtue of the fractal self-similarity, to actually hold it in our hearts and in our minds, then it's actually a new game. It's a new day and it's a new species. So rather than saying Homo sapiens cubed, we need a new name. And another maybe benefit of being able to see the whole pattern is that there's a great resiliency that comes. And I'm wondering a bit from your points, but hopefully adding something. I don't see civilizational collapse at the end of this epoch by virtue of the interconnectedness we can see and grok. We can deeply know the patterns. We can see the wholeness. We can, as a species, respond to the challenges so that we don't sink in isolation. Sure, there's decoherence and there's coherence. There's decoherence below the line. There's growing coherence above the line. And it's all an integrated process, a living process, like you said. And as within, so without. And to tweak the as above, so below teaching. So it's happening in us, it's happening around us, it's happening everywhere. It's one process, and it's a benevolent process.
Indeed, thank you, Jeff. So we are proposing, as one way to appreciate the new species, is to recognize that a universalis human is awakened. And it very much is the idea you are describing, that once we are able to decode the pattern and integrate the multi-perspectival way of seeing the pattern, we birth ourselves into a universal possibility. So the deeper underlying premise is that in our collective metabolizing of those feelings and sentiments and awareness, we are actually midwifing inside out, as you're saying, inside out, within and without, the premise, the potential, the actualization of that new species right through our life. We are birthing new selves in us as part of this journey. And so to now go into the higher resolution and describe this weekend journey focused on the 5 epochal stories, and then focus specifically on story 4, which is the dialytic story. And that's what I'll do in this segment. And then we will do another segment at the back end of that to go into some of the specific process, the self-appraisal process that unlocks potential into story 4. So now to go into regrounding us in a way of appreciation of the blueprint, the 7-fold blueprint We're saying that red not only represents, is the originating, carries the originating impulse, catalyzing the arising, whatever the arising is. It may be an arising of a new life, it may be an arising of a new endeavor. In the case of the epoch, red is an origination point where the epoch arises. And orange represent in that the nourishing and the support and the expansion of the nascent arising. And yellow then takes whatever space and expansion has been won to recognize that we now need to reorchestrate and coordinate a higher level of alignment and connection and integration around a higher principle, or else we get fragmented and dispersed. And green comes on top of that to offer regeneration and renewal and energizing individuation, and also gives way to artistic expression. And I've, on different conversations on Portal, demonstrated how these stages occur in a development of a business, in a development of a community, and also through the rise and fall of cultures. Blue is where we need to now balance and regulate and systematize and build some protocols and programs and ecologies of support, or else the system will break down. And when we tell the epochal story, we describe that one example for the origination of the epoch can be found in the ancient Egyptian culture, because it was a very purposeful culture in its first place. And that culture too, when it expanded into its orange nature, it started to decline. One of the ways we see throughout the unfolding of the epoch the recurring fractal of orange, in the ancient world, it's the expansion of the Roman Empire, which in the end fell apart because it expanded more than its ability to hold the center intact. So once again, it went into its indigo and violet sunset. When we look at a modern, more recent example of orange, well, the British Empire comes to mind, and how it used and leveraged the mercantilist approach, and also the cunning and subversive aspect of it. For example, not just in creating the largest empire where the sun never set, but how it brought the Opium Wars to China and subjugated China and created resentment in China for 120 years. So we see the below the line expression time and again, and we're proposing that in each of those there was always latent and some higher potential in each of those fractals. Yellow, which became the focus of our weekend in Telling Story 4, is seen in the rise of axial religion, this 1,000 years where major axial religions emerged in the East and the West, and green shows up as a recurring fractal throughout the epoch. One time where green appeared was right after the Black Plague in the emergence of the Renaissance. So I'm quite deliberately dropping again examples that are not linear, because I want to demonstrate that what we're describing is not a chronological story. This is not another way of telling pre-modern, modern, postmodern evolution of the epoch. No, these are core intrinsic potencies that recur through the ages time and again, and they bring their nature, with indigo bringing the merging, integration, and transference catalyst, indigo being seen in earlier times as the rise of metropolitan centers, where there was merging and integration of commerce, seen through the development of exchanges, where people could come together and trade, and seen in more recent time with the rise of the internet, which is the ultimate postmodern merging and transference theater that indigo is. Violet, which we assert is the culmination point, is where the phase shift transition occurs, where there is a death and rebirth. And to the point you just made earlier, I wholly agree that the premise is we don't think we're going to destroy this planet. We think we have the capacity to avoid the civilizational elimination that we now have the power to cause, but we believe that by cultivating this awareness and consciousness, we can use violet not to eliminate life on the planet, but to actually liberate life to its higher level of manifestation and fruition. So that's the very brief version of running through the fractal of the sevenfold potencies, and we could easily adapt it to the small and large scale in any way we choose. What comes alive for you as you reflect on that?
Well, I would say, thank you, that it's an evolutionary step change to lift out of the linear application of stages and various models to explore the simultaneity of the different impulses that are actually a single process. And in the human experience of linear time, fair enough, we may experience the transitions from ancient and pre-modern to modern, postmodern, post-postmodern, whatever it may be I'm playing here. That's fine. And if we look more deeply, if we feel more deeply into the nature of the process, I would say you're onto something in understanding the simultaneity of the various impulses, and also the reframe from the violent violet to something much more hopeful.
Indeed. I am observing my year-and-a-half young grandson. Initially, right after birth, very much in the originating impulse of life. And now that he started to walk and play, he is expanding. There is a natural orange impulse to expand. He is not yet in the yellow stage, but it will appear in some way right after it, and then will be the learning of green. And yet at the same time, in every day we go through all 7 dimensions, all 7 potencies, because we get up in the morning as there is the red that wakes us up to the potential of the day, and then we make our first few steps into the day to open to its horizon of possibilities, which is orange, and then we say, okay, well, let me recenter and discover what is my purpose today, what can I serve, what is the highest service I can offer today, that's yellow. And then I use myself up a little bit around that, and sometime at noon or after noon, there is, okay, I've done already half the day, and now I need to renew myself and get energized, and that's the green. And right before I close the day in the evening, there is a bit of a balancing and a regulation and appreciation of what had happened through the day. And then the night process is a process that goes through indigo and violet. And part of the repair that occurs through the night, including through dreams, is all about the rebirthing that then indigo and violet enable us to show up for the following day, renewed and ready to meet again the world and dance with life. So anything else on that before I move to the next, please?
I'm ready to speed skate to the next.
Yeah. Well, so I want us to look now at the 5 epochal stories and the focus of story 4, which is to do with the release and the healing and the dialysis of the condition line. So the way we come to this is by appreciating that, as we just reflected, the transition of the epoch involves the rise and fall of cultures and civilizations. But that, Jeff, is really story 1, is what we call history. His story, history. And there are the story of history is important, yet it carries several problems. There are several problems in the way we tell and the way we learn history. First problem is that history is written by victors and the conquerors with very little say, if any, from the vanquished and the extinct. They were not left to tell their story, to tell about their loves and about their sentiments and about their traditions. They disappeared largely. So history is always told from the point of view of the victors. And because of that, history is an expression and a celebration of the values and the aspirations of those conquerors and subjugators. So there is this bias that's built into the telling of history. It largely quashes and eliminates other narratives, other perspectives, other meaning maps, other values. It propagates blindness to other perspectives. And especially in recent history, recent centuries, history has been largely packaged inside an academic industrial product, teach it to the masses, and build into it the narrative that we need to propagate. And that is part of the mass consumption of education in the way history has been told. And even more than that, history has currently been framed inside a materialistic, physicalist, that is to say, a point of view that sees the physical world without measuring or without including and integrating an interior dimension, very much anchored in a socio-economic context where GDP measures societal health and progress. So the core element of story one are those progress within that context. And these are some of the problems, which is why we integrate story 2 and story 3. Before I move to story 2 and story 3, what would you say to this observation of the bias built into the way we learn and teach history?
Well, it calibrates as true. And I even am tempted to use the phrase patently obvious. It's so clear now, at least I would say that it's clear to me, having sat with these kinds of insights and conversations, that we also would benefit from a her story. And I'm curious whether that might possibly be story 2.
And indeed, I love it that you are a step ahead of us. Story 2, her story, is a story where we say, well, hold on a minute. There is much more to tell in the story, because those cultures and civilizations that were eliminated or are gone or are largely squashed, they do live in another way, in the sentiments and the values and the traditions that almost disappeared, but they live in an energetic form. And is there a way for us to tune in to those sentiments, to sense, to feel, to wonder what was the grandeur of purpose of the ancient Egyptian culture, such that you won't see them laughing or smiling, and you won't see teeth in Egyptian art because they communicated differently. What was it about the ancient Greek culture? What was it about the great teachers in the East that you recently walked in their footsteps? And can you attune? Is there a way to attune to their contemplations, to their meditations, and actually feel that in some ways they're still alive? They are alive in the vibrant, invisible, maintaining, blessing, and causing realms. And if we are prepared to sensitize to this story, then we begin to open in ourselves a whole other story, story 2, her story. And it is her story, story 2, that leads us to story 3, which is even more subtle, even more difficult to attune to, largely because we have been so much enculturated in the story that emerged after the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution, and the intellect-driven story where so much of what we consider to be knowledge is head knowledge, conceptual knowledge. But is there a way to sense into the vibrant, invisible, blessing realms and discover and realize, oh, people in the ancient world experienced knowledge differently. There was a different there were different sense organs and different ways they metabolized knowledge. They saw the rainbow and didn't think of the rainbow in the sky purely as a physical phenomena of light refracting through sufficient humidity in the air. They looked at these colors and they represented a covenant of being. And was it just a mythology, or was there more to it, that the planetary property and the sun rays property, when they converged, they produced a beautiful visual rainbow experience, and that in itself transferred to them a different sense of meaning? So story 3 is where we begin to really slow down the conversation, to sense that the realms of experiencing knowledge in ancient mystery schools and in ancient cultures involved people who were much more porous to the miraculous and to the phenomenology of life. That in recent time, people have been seeking through the resurgence of psychedelics and the microdosing trend of people just taking sufficient chemistry into the brain to release a different potential, more boundaryless potential, which I don't do and I don't advertise, but some people do. My assertion and the school of thought that I've been exploring over the last 3 decades has always been that you can reach the liminal by engaging those latent capacities to begin to integrate story 3. And it is in that sense that story 2 and 3 really invite us to a premise of story 4 and story 5. Because story 1, story 2, and story 3 is the unfolding of these stories through time. Story 4 and story 5 is how we now get to experience and tell the stories. Well, story 4 is the dialytic story, is our capacity to process and metabolize anything that has happened in the past, to go back to these ancient times and bring up in our awareness, in our consciousness, the reasoning and the awareness of what it was that has occurred and how would we metabolize it today and how will we harvest the best of it today. And story 5, which is yet to be discovered, is largely unwritten, is the evolutionary crown to reach for, is where evolution is nudging us to. And when we look at these two in context, story 4 is about rewriting the past, which we have the capacity to do, and that's some of the work you and I have engaged in before. And in a minute, I'm going back to that to demonstrate specifically the dialytic focus on the yellow segment. So rewriting the past in story 4 and writing the future in story 5, ultimately in writing the future, inviting the possibility of giving rise to the universal human cathedral. So in the ancient world, you had generations that started to build a cathedral. They knew that their grandson will walk into the cathedral. We are now giving rise to the universal human cathedral within. So I'd invite you to make some comments to what is this bringing up in you.
Well, I'm really delighting in the synthesis and the clarity of how one story leads to another. And I would revisit the earlier comment about the simultaneity, the capacity to hold all five stories together may be, oh, this is a new thought, may be what really unlocks and opens up the fifth story, the evolutionary crown to reach for. Somehow that, it seems to me, emerges and announces itself quite naturally when we can steep in this field of stories. And in terms of rewriting the past, I've had an interesting esoteric experience in which I actually changed the past, and suddenly the map of where I was going in life changed instantaneously, and yet there was still a little bit of a memory of the way that it used to be, and then that memory disappeared. I've also had experiences of people saying one thing and a few years later reporting a completely different recollection of that time. And it's as if the past is actually quite malleable. So when we're rewriting the past here, I would say that it's powerful beyond the words that we use to tell these stories. There's something going on energetically and archetypally within the collective.
These are tremendously important observations. Essentially, you're saying what we have here on the slide is a very brief abbreviation to a few words of a deep, energetic, psychic process that's not even arrested in time, because when you rewrite the past, it is in actual fact a way in which you are changing the limbic topography in your own experience and thereby in the whole, because you are fractal of the whole. So that is what led us to the core premise of this weekend, where we said, let us focus on story 4 and do the dialytic work of the sevenfold fractal. Now, in fact, we didn't do the sevenfold because there wasn't time. So we only rather swiftly went through red and orange, and I'll bring it up in a minute, and then did a bit of a deep dive into yellow. And it was very much motivated by what you just offered there, Jeff. That is the truth of the claim from Margaret Mead in the first place, and that we reassert today, which is when we metabolize in our own consciousness an appreciation such that we ask, for example, about any period in history, what is it that we will choose to honor and harvest and admit into our formation today, because we need that strength. There is something we can learn from the Egyptians. There is something we can learn from the ancient Greek a lot. There is something we can learn from people who lived through the Middle Ages. There is something we can learn from the Copernicus and Galileo impulse of the 1600. We need to choose what it is that we will harvest from this journey to the epoch. And so we said, let us begin by creating some dialytic messages to harvest the best from red. And we went quiet, and somebody would play music, and people would meditate and contemplate and would write, and some people would do it in drawing, and some people would actually do it in a dance. And that was an important part of this entire experience. We actually ensure that we are not just in our heads. We go quiet, and or 2 or 3 people that are professionally and by passion work somatically, they would sense into the inquiry of sublimating and metabolizing and harvesting in the dialysis of red to bring the best of it, and they will actually do it in movement. And just distilling some of the intelligence that arose in that, it offered that indeed red contains originating reasons. So some of the lower aspects of red that we may choose to dialysize is the loss of originating connection, the loss of those reasons. And then whenever there is a loss of those reasons, they appear with lesser intentions. including in the case of red, the victor-victim polarity, the conqueror and the conquered polarity. And how, so when I choose to be dialectic on red in myself, because whatever, as you said, whatever is out there in history is also in me, so how would I be dialectic in this in myself? Well, I will look to generate attunement to the purposes and the first principles of whatever I choose to work on. And that involves, for example, sublimating rivalrous instincts and discovering the chivalrous instincts that could replace these, and reversing certain biological programs and giving birth to new reasons to connect with higher originating causations. So these are just some brief notes from, again, a larger laboratory on sublimating and dialysizing red. Anything that comes up for you in this?
Well, the appreciative focus, what is true in red, what is true in any of the colors, frankly, what is the gift, what is the blessing. And what I'm hearing is when we forget what is the gift, what is the blessing, what is the truth in the particular impulse, that's when we get the below the line or shadow manifestations.
Indeed. And so that led us, Jeff, to ask a similar question in orange. What would be for us to, a way for us to look at the orange impulse, this nourishing support impulse, and see how it needs our dialectic sublimation and metabolization? And in a similar way, again, running through this laboratory, we described that orange indeed contains the nourishment and the support and the expansion of originating impulses and reasons. And that's therefore some of the lower, below the line expressions of orange include expansionism, excessive power grab, gluttony, and also apathy and the loss of the sense of self. And so how could I be dialectic in orange? Well, to reason and to attune, to find again, bring clarity of intent, to discipline, to find a way to bring discipline of focus to whatever it is you're working on, to establish boundaries and clarify what is yours to do and what is not for you to do, and to update what you will and won't do. Therefore, these are some of the impulses of being dialectic in orange. Again, seeing that when I do the orange work in myself, I invite the dialysis of orange in the larger ecosystem. Anything that comes up for you with orange?
Just I'm tracking. I feel the pattern for all of the colors. I'm curious about yellow naturally.
Okay. Well, so this is where we did the deep dive, because we asked, what dialysis of yellow are we called to generate in story 4? And here we really slowed down the conversation and made space to firstly get regrounded in what was the function of yellow earlier in the epoch progression, because we described the representation of yellow, for example, to be the rise of axial religions. And so in this large laboratory, we had maybe 40 or 50 people offering their inside-out discovery and sense about the function of yellow in the epoch progression. So again, to swiftly run this by you, sublimate barbarism, because the barbarism way of being meant you would wake up in the morning either to kill or to be killed. Try to kill before you're being killed. So yellow was an invitation to transcend that animalistic persuasion that finds its way into human life. and in that liberate from red and orange dominance. So find a way to take the initial impulse of red and orange, liberate from it, and now enable new knowledge to arise. And with that new knowledge, to open and warm the human to finer and deeper feelings. Okay, when the human system is in its barbaric ecosystem, there is no room, there is no space to sense and feel deeply in a finer way. But yellow made the invitation to those permissions and possibilities in human life. And therefore it brought and caused an alignment shift to a higher principle as expressed through the various religions. And it offered permission to congregate and to find belonging in a whole new way, in a large-scale context of people finding themselves inside a context and a mythology and a story of meaning and value that they could congregate around and find belonging. And therefore it energized new communal identities and possibilities, and also gave rise to a new kind of leadership, different from the warlords of barbaric ecosystem, barbaric way of being. Now, again, what I'm describing is not tracking chronologically because you have all of it happening concurrently. We're describing what it was that the yellow impulse brought to as a function in the developmental program of the epoch. And therefore, we propose yellow activate new sense organs and communication apparatus in the human. And it encourages us to find shared values and meaning and appreciate the significance of life in a whole new way. And with that, connect with higher sources of inspiration and integration, source new inspiration and intelligence that was perhaps not available before, and begin to prepare the human to the universalis evolution. So again, a very abbreviated sense from what was more meditative way of listening, not just to the words, but to the feelings, the atmosphere, the resonance. A person would speak, and it's as though they would drop a pebble, and the ripples would travel energetically in the subtle field to feel and sense what it means when you truly appreciate that consideration, that dimension of yellow.
Great. Well, I have a sense you're going to ask me for any reflections, and what's coming is an appreciation of within the seemingly linear progression, there is an integration that is available from color to color, from step to step. And so earlier I was appreciating the transcendence of linearity, and now I'm inclined to transcend the transcendence and bring the linearity back in as one form of experiencing this whole that has great value. And then there's even the transcendence of transcendence of transcendence. And that sounds very abstract, but I'm seeing that you're approaching this wholeness in multiple ways, and maybe the transcendence of transcendence comes with violet. I'm curious to follow this progression further.
Well, another way we used before to describe what you are codifying in transcendence of transcendence actually is ensoulment, when you rethread through the sevenfold and you integrate them in all their many dimensions. When you say, well, that Roman emperor is in me. Okay, now in one case it's the Marcus Aurelius, and there is so much that I can still learn from his meditations. And yet he operated in an ecosystem and ways and inside a culture in which, well, what will I choose to sublimate? Because he truly embodied the aspiration of being an enlightened emperor. And then before him and after him, there were other facets. So how would I metabolize and ensoul myself? Because we need some of that operating system in the crown to reach for. In other words, the universe, it loves economy. So if there is a know-how or knowledge that was codified earlier in the epoch, why waste it? Why not sublimate it, distill from it its essence, hospice and release what is no longer needed, and bring forward to the furthering of the evolutionary story the part we need. So we then took it one more step with yellow and said, well, so why do dialytic work? One answer is in each of the boxes we've seen, all of those represent an opportunity to still do some of that work today in the context of today. And then we further asked, okay, but what will dialytic work enable? And further, we added to that the third inquiry, which is how to do dialytic yellow work. How do we actually do that? And then again, we opened the collaborative, co-creative lab, and I distilled just few impressions from that for us here today, the why, the what, the how of dialytic yellow endeavor. So one reason as to why to do dialytic work, yellow work, is to liberate yellow, because yellow in many senses have been blued, blue in the sense of blue building systems and structures. So all the axial religions that emerged in the first place around an energetic source, around an essence that offered a new set of stories and meaning and value, a lot of that has turned into institutionalized bureaucracy in the various schools, in the various streams. How about doing the dialytic yellow work to liberate the essence from its arrestation and allow it to come into currency, and to do so such that we become available for the new updating religious impulse and impulses that are seeking to access and arise in humanity. Recently you shared a trip to the Himalayas that you journeyed on with a group of people, where there was an endeavor you created that was co-led, where you wanted to journey to the source of the Ganges as a way of, not just a metaphor, but in actuality journeying to the energetic source of what these great beliefs and teachings represent. So right there, to me, you were doing both the sublimation and the dialysis of the past, and in a way opening yourself to, as you described beautifully in that conversation, to, the religious impulse can now co-arise, not in one person, and not just in one man, but actually in a gathering of people, and with the female gender too co-arise. And by the way, in the feminine aspect in the man and in the masculine aspect in the women, all of the above, all the permutations above. So this is part of what we codified for the why, and as you just intuited, to facilitate the violet transition with an updated devotional alignment, because violet is so potent and at one level creates that fragmentation and breakdown, which is why we need to regenerate and replenish and rediscover a new updated yellow inside that context. Let me pause here and just give you a chance to play jazz a little bit with that, from how it's coming across, and also from your own journeys.
Well, these are some big questions, and I've continued to play with this notion of the triple transcendence and Homo sapiens, 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 and this sense of kind of a pendulum swinging and a spiral rising. These are just all visuals that I have, and I know they also seem quite abstract, of of this journey that you've been on and this archetypal journey that we're on as humans. It's amazing the walk along the Bhagirathi, which is uh, the first Ganga, if you will, because there are 5 confluences that result in um, the river that's actually called Ganga. That was a linear walk, and yet the pilgrimage had many dimensions and a lot of time to feel in an embodied and very experiential and nuanced way the boundaries of one's comfort zone and also the opportunities for porosity and growth as in my case, the divine actually poured into this being when I recognized the limitations. And so there were various transcendences that were occurring along the way, and then actually reaching the source, because the source of all is, in a sense, the point where it all comes together. And there's great alchemy that is possible when the polarities and the multiplicities are seen in their root nature as unicity. And then that's when I had the total life reboot, which is still ongoing. And in this notion of the triple transcendence or Homo sapiens, 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 I really see that there's a new species that emerges when we go to the source of all of this. And to the extent that we can, through systematic inquiry, arrive at the source in a way that the whole system can believe and appreciate, including the mind that loves to dissect and put the pieces back together. This is medicine. This is food for Homo sapiens sapiens, and I see it's right on time with respect to the epoch culmination.
Indeed, Jeff, and actually what you're describing is the answer in some way, is one answer to the next 2 segments here, the what will dialectic yellow work enable and how to do dialectic yellow work. Because in what you're describing in the pilgrimage and you embarked on and how you prepared yourself for it and how you journeyed with others and the various practices you engaged in, they very much describe some of what I'm now going to show here on the slide in slightly perhaps different language. So one way to describe what will dialectic work, yellow work enable, well, it allows sublimation. It enables self-forgiveness and transmogrification through self-examination and release, which you are describing in your experience as a life reboot. And yellow dialectic work will enable an inner rewiring and transformation and integration, which again is some form of life reboot, which in your experience occurred, if I remember right, at a particular moment over one night, one specific night after you reached the high point on the mountain. And it also allows in the communal, because we humans, we are communal and we are familial, there is tremendous significance to what we do together. It allows the celebration and the ceremonizing of shared devotion and significance and purpose. All of that is part of the answer to the question, what dialectic yellow work will enable. How we do this work? We do this by singing, by dancing, by and through all forms of somatic and theater work that express passion, and through all forms of artwork exploration. And actually, when we engage with some of these, what we do, we bring green, the impulse of green into yellow. And it certainly, from what you have shared in your pilgrimage journey and in what we conducted this weekend, it involves meditation and contemplation and prayer and inner conclave connection work. And again, it involves many, many forms and modalities of co-leadership, of working in small pods and crews and teams, and of interpersonal witnessing and support and healing work. All of those are included in what we are describing in the dialectic yellow work. Anything you would speak to from those expressions and what comes up for you?
Well, I remember with fondness our conversation about the inner conclave. So just to focus on this one box, following the journey to the source, I spontaneously created an inner conclave of feminine goddesses, Durga, Kali, Parvati, Green Tara, and another. So, and they've been extremely helpful. This meditative and contemplative practice of checking in and seeing what messages there are and having conversations with these inner, let's say, parts of my own being, but maybe my more feminine nature, let's say, it has guided me. This process has guided me very strongly in the last month or so since that journey. And yes, co-leadership and various configurations have also been extremely important in unlocking the latent potential, like you were describing with Zoom and breakout rooms and different people and then different energies coming together. It's very catalytic, dialytic even.
Indeed, indeed. So that was a big part of the journey. And what I want to do is end this segment here and start immediately segment 2 to add one more piece that we will publish separately, which will be about, okay, so what else can I do in my own life, in my own journey? And we explore the whole body of work around self-appraisal. So Jeff, thank you for accompanying me and calibrating this journey. See you on the other side. Along with our website at portalsofperception.org, Portals is also available on YouTube and on all podcast platforms, as well as social media. You can become an active member and join the conversation in community events. And you can help us get the word out by liking this content and by sharing it with your friends.